smokes, man. So I see the Daytona Charger here.
This is the only one I've ever found that hasn't been sold.
It hasn't been sold. What engine is in this one?
440.
This is a 440 Magnum.
When it comes to raw power, unrestrained design, and cars that make absolutely no sense on paper, but every bit of sense on the road, muscle cars are in a league of their own. Over the decades, manufacturers have built machines that were never meant to be polite or subtle. These weren't cars for quiet Sunday drives. They were created for one purpose only: pure chaos. Whether it was monstrous engines shoved into undersized bodies, cars so powerful they terrified even seasoned drivers, or models designed solely to embarrass rivals at the drag strip, these beasts redefined what too much really meant. From Detroit classics of the 1960s to modern-day monsters pushing the limits of technology, each car on this list tells a story of engineers gone wild and automakers daring to go further than anyone asked them to. Buckle up, because these 17 chaotic muscle cars aren't here to play. Number 17. 1969. Dodge Charger Daytona. If there was ever a car that screamed chaos from the moment it rolled onto the streets, it was the 1969 Dodge Charger Daytona. Built with a pointed aerodynamic nose cone and a massive rear wing that looked like it belonged on a fighter jet, the Daytona wasn't just another muscle car, it was a weapon designed for NASCAR domination. Dodge wasn't messing around. This was the first car in NASCAR history to break the 200 miles per hour barrier. Under the hood, buyers could choose between a 440 Magnum VF8 or the legendary 426 HEMI, both delivering enough grunt to leave competitors in the dust. The car's design was so extreme that it barely looked street legal, and in many ways, it wasn't meant to be. It was built to win races at any cost. On the road, it was equally terrifying. Massive power, barely controllable handling, and styling that made people stop and stare. The Daytona didn't just change racing, it sparked the aero wars of the late 1960s and forced NASCAR to eventually ban such radical designs. That's how you know this car was pure chaos. It was literally too fast and too wild for the rulebook. Number 16. 1970. Chevrolet Chevelle SS 454 LS6. If you wanted chaos wrapped in sheet metal, the 1970 Chevrolet Chevelle SS 454 LS6 was your car. At the time, it was considered one of the most powerful muscle cars ever built, straight from the factory. Chevy engineers decided to take their already aggressive Chevelle SS and give it a monster. The LS6 454 cubic inch V8. This engine churned out a rated 450 horsepower and an earth-shattering 500 pound-feet of torque. But anyone who's ever driven one will tell you those numbers were underrated. On the drag strip, the Chevelle LS6 could eat just about anything that dared to line up next to it. The car looked just as menacing as it felt. With its wide stance, bulging hood, and aggressive striping, it gave off the perfect "don't mess with me" vibe. But the real chaos came when you pressed the pedal. This car wasn't built for smooth handling or quiet cruising. It was built to throw you back in your seat and leave your knuckles white as you fought to control all that power. The 1970 Chevelle SS 454 LS6 remains a legend because it embodied the very definition of muscle car madness: raw, unapologetic, and terrifyingly fast. Number 15. 1970 Plymouth Hemi Cuda. When it comes to muscle car insanity, the 1970 Plymouth Hemi Cuda sits in a league of its own. This wasn't just a car, It was a statement from Chrysler that they weren't afraid to go bigger, bolder, and wilder than the competition. The Hemi Cuda came with the legendary 426 cubic inch Hemi 5.8 under the hood, pushing a conservative factory rating of 425 horsepower. In reality, many of these cars made far more. What made the Hemi Cuda so chaotic wasn't just the power. It was the combination of performance and street presence. With its aggressive shaker hood scoop, bold colors like limelight and vitamin C, and muscular stance, the Cuda demanded attention before it even started. But once you turned the key, it became a thunderous monster. It was notorious for being difficult to tame, spinning tires with the slightest provocation, and terrifying drivers who weren't ready for its brute strength. Adding to the chaos, the Hemi Cuda was expensive and rare. Only a few hundred were ever produced with the 426 HEMI, making it both legendary and elusive. To this day, it's one of the most desirable muscle cars in existence. A car built purely for speed, noise, and intimidation. Number 14. 1969. Ford Mustang Boss 429. If the phrase, "too much engine for the car," ever needed a poster child, the 1969 Ford Mustang Boss 429 would be it. Ford built this beast for one reason: to homologate their new 429 cubic inch V8 for NASCAR racing. That meant cramming one of the largest, most powerful engines of the era into the Mustang's engine bay, even though it barely fit. Ford had to completely re-engineer the front end, moving shock towers and modifying the suspension just to squeeze in the Boss 429. On paper, the engine was rated at 375 horsepower, but most experts agree that number was deliberately underrated to keep insurance agents calm. In reality, the Boss 429 was a monster waiting to be unleashed. While it wasn't the quickest in a straight line due to its immense size and weight, the sheer sound and presence of this car was enough to send chills down anyone's spine. The Boss 429 also looked the part, with its muscular body lines, aggressive hood scoop, and wide stance. It was never meant for the average driver. This was a machine built for chaos on the track, and Ford didn't care if it was borderline unmanageable on the street. Number 13. 1971. Dodge Challenger RT HEMI. The early 70s were a golden era of muscle cars, and Dodge wasn't about to let competitors steal the spotlight. Enter the 1971 Dodge Challenger RT HEMI, a car that looked like trouble standing still and backed it up with brutal performance. Under the hood sat the 426 HEMI V8, Chrysler's crown jewel, officially rated at 425 horsepower, but capable of so much more with a few tweaks. The Challenger's long, low stance gave it a road presence few cars could match. With bold, high-impact colors like Plum Crazy or Hemi Orange, plus optional stripes and spoilers, it screamed rebellion and raw muscle from every angle. But the real chaos began once the driver mashed the throttle. This wasn't a car you simply drove. It was a car you wrestled. The Challenger RT could turn a calm afternoon cruise into a tire-shredding spectacle at the slightest provocation. Adding to its legend was exclusivity. Hemi-powered Challengers were rare, expensive, and notorious for being high-maintenance brutes. Yet for those lucky enough to own one, the chaos was worth every bit of the price. Today, it's remembered as one of the wildest, most untamed muscle cars ever to roll out of Detroit. Number 12-1966 Shelby GT 350H Rent-A-Racer. Sometimes chaos comes not just from power, but from accessibility. The 1966 Shelby GT 350H was proof of that. Built as part of a deal between Carroll Shelby and Hertz's Rent-A-Racer program, ordinary people could walk into a Hertz counter, rent one of these high-performance Mustangs, and unleash it on the streets for a weekend. Imagine handing over a race-bred muscle car to the general public with nothing more than a rental contract. That's pure madness. The GT 350H packed a 289 cubic inch Hypo V8 tuned by Shelby, delivering around 306 horsepower in a lightweight Mustang fastback. With its signature black and gold livery, it looked every bit the part of a street brawler. Renters quickly discovered that this wasn't some watered-down rental car. It was the real deal, capable of tearing up drag strips and shredding tires with ease. Chaos came in many forms. Stories of renters swapping engines before returning the cars, taking them to races, and even crashing them outright. Hertz eventually realized they had essentially unleashed a fleet of wild Mustangs into the hands of adrenaline junkies. Today, the GT 350H is remembered as one of the most chaotic ideas ever in the muscle car world. Because who lets the public rent a race car? Number 11. 1970 Buick GSX Stage 1. When people think of chaotic muscle cars, Buick usually isn't the first name that comes to mind. But in 1970, Buick decided to remind everyone that even a luxury brand could play dirty. The result was the Buick GSX Stage 1, a car that took refinement and then strapped a stick of dynamite under the hood. At its core was a 455 cubic inch V8, officially rated at 360 horsepower. But here's the twist. Buick engineers were notorious for underrating their engines. The GSX Stage 1's massive torque output, 510 pound-feet, was enough to roast tires at will and shock anyone who underestimated it. In fact, real-world testing showed it could outrun many of the most famous muscle cars of its era. What made the GSX Stage 1 chaotic wasn't just the speed, but the audacity. This was a Buick meant to compete with Chevelles, Mustangs, and Chargers, cars built on rebellion and noise. The GSX combined brutal performance with comfort, offering plush interiors alongside neck-snapping acceleration. It was chaos in disguise, like a polite-looking gentleman who picks a bar fight and wins. Add in its iconic Saturn yellow or Apollo white paint schemes with bold stripes, and the GSX was impossible to ignore. A true wolf in sheep's clothing, and one of the most chaotic surprises in muscle car history. Number 10. 1968 Pontiac GTO The Judge. If muscle cars were about attitude as much as horsepower, the 1968 Pontiac GTO Judge was the class clown who also happened to bench press 400 pounds. Pontiac already had the GTO, often considered the car that kicked off the muscle car era, but the Judge was something else entirely. This wasn't just a performance upgrade, it was a loud, brash, and chaotic statement on wheels. Under the hood, the Judge packed a 400 cubic inch Ram Air 3 V8, delivering 366 horsepower, with the optional Ram Air 4 pushing it even further. This made it more than capable of holding its own against any rival at the Stoplight Grand Prix. But what really set it apart was its wild styling. From the bold graphics to the iconic carousel red paint, it looked like Pontiac had dipped it straight in chaos and sent it to market. The Judge wasn't about subtlety, It was about making noise, both figuratively and literally. Pontiac marketed it as a cheaper, flashier alternative for younger buyers. But what they really did was give the world a muscle car that embodied the freewheeling spirit of the late 60s. It was chaotic, colorful, and unapologetically rebellious. Number 9. 1964. Ford Fairlane Thunderbolt. If there was ever a car built purely to wreak havoc on drag strips, it was the 1964 Ford Fairlane Thunderbolt. Ford engineers took the lightweight Fairlane body and stuffed a 427 cubic inch V8 under the hood, a motor originally designed for racing. The result was a factory-built drag racer that had no business being anywhere near a regular street. The Thunderbolt churned out around 425 horsepower, but in a car stripped of unnecessary weight, complete with fiberglass doors, hood, and fenders, that number felt much higher. It was brutally quick, capable of quarter-mile times in the low 11-second range straight from the factory. That kind of performance in the mid-60s was absolute madness. What made the Thunderbolt chaotic was its uncompromising nature. It didn't care about comfort, no frills, no luxury, not even a radio or heater in many cases. This was a weapon disguised as a car, and Ford only built about 100 of them, just enough to qualify for NHRA Superstock competition. On the drag strip, it terrorized everything in its path, becoming a nightmare for competitors and a legend for fans. The Thunderbolt wasn't a muscle car for the masses. It was chaos built for the few. Number 8. 1970. Oldsmobile 442 W30. Oldsmobile isn't always the first name that comes up in muscle car conversations, but the 1970 Oldsmobile 442 W30 proved they could play with the big boys and bring chaos to the streets while doing it. The 442 stood for 4-barrel carburetor, 4-speed manual transmission, and dual exhaust, and the W30 package took all of that to the next level. Under the hood was a massive 455 cubic inch V8, officially rated at 370 horsepower. But like many muscle cars of the era, the numbers were conservative. What really mattered was the torque, 500 pound-feet of it, enough to launch the car with brutal force and shred tires at will. The W30 also came with performance upgrades like a fiberglass hood with functional scoops, a hotter camshaft, and improved air induction. The 442 W30 wasn't just about straight-line speed, though. It was about shock value. With its bold stripes, unmistakable stance, and an exhaust note that sounded like controlled chaos, this Oldsmobile made sure everyone knew it wasn't a car to mess with. It blurred the line between luxury and lunacy, delivering both comfort and bone-rattling performance. The W30 proved Oldsmobile could build one of the wildest, most chaotic muscle cars of the 1970s, an underdog that demanded respect. Number 7. 1967 Chevrolet Camaro Z/28. The Camaro was Chevrolet's answer to the Mustang, but the 1967 Camaro Z/28 wasn't just competition, it was chaos unleashed. Designed for the SCCA Trans Am Racing Series, the Z/28 wasn't built for comfort or mass-market appeal. It was built to win races, and Chevy made sure it came out swinging. Under the hood was a high-revving 302 cubic inch small-block V8, underrated at 290 horsepower, but capable of screaming far beyond that in real-world conditions. This engine wasn't about brute force torque, like many of its muscle car rivals. It was about precision chaos, revving to the sky and begging drivers to push it harder and harder. The Z/28 came with heavy-duty suspension, quick ratio steering, and front disc brakes, making it one of the best handling muscle cars of its day. On the street, it was raw and unrefined, a race car barely disguised as a daily driver. On the track, it was a predator, slicing through corners and leaving chaos in its wake. With its aggressive stripes, cowl induction hood, and unmistakable stance, the 67 Z28 looked as wild as it performed. Chevy may have built it for racing, but what they really created was a chaotic legend that cemented the Camaro's place in muscle car history. Number 6, 1971, Plymouth Roadrunner 446 pack. If muscle cars were about combining wild looks with outrageous power, the 1971 Plymouth Roadrunner 446 pack nailed it. Plymouth took their already legendary Roadrunner and stuffed it with one of Chrysler's most chaotic power plants. The 440 cubic inch V8, topped with 3 two-barrel carburetors. The result was 385 horsepower on paper, but in practice, it felt like a rolling earthquake. The Roadrunner 446 pack was never meant to be civilized. It was designed for one thing: dominating the street and strip. Stomp the gas, and the triple carbs kicked in like a sledgehammer, delivering neck-snapping acceleration and a thunderous roar that could rattle windows from blocks away. This car didn't just move fast, it announced its presence like a storm. Adding to the chaos was Plymouth's styling for 1971. With cartoon-inspired decals, wild color options like Curious Yellow and Vitamin C, and aggressive body lines, the Roadrunner was as loud visually as it was mechanically. Drivers didn't just get horsepower, they got an attitude. The 446 pack Roadrunner embodied the muscle car era's reckless spirit. Oversized engines, outrageous looks, and no apologies. It was a car that laughed at subtlety and embraced chaos at every turn. Number 5, 1970, Dodge Coronet Super Bee 426 HEMI. If subtlety was never in Dodge's vocabulary, then the 1970 Coronet Super Bee 426 HEMI proved it. This car was pure Detroit muscle, dripping with attitude and built to intimidate. The Super Bee had already earned a reputation as Dodge's budget-friendly street bruiser, but when optioned with the legendary 426 HEMI, it became something else entirely. A car born for pure chaos. The 426 Hemi was officially rated at 425 horsepower, but real-world figures were much higher. It turned the Super Bee into a straight-line rocket, capable of shredding tires and frightening even seasoned drivers. Paired with its relatively simple, no-nonsense body style, the HEMI Super Bee was like a brawler in plain clothes, unassuming until the fight started, and then absolutely devastating. The 1970 redesign gave the Super Bee a more aggressive, split-grill bumblebee face, making it look even meaner. Combine that with wild Mopar color options, like Plum Crazy and Hemi Orange, and you had a car that was impossible to ignore. This wasn't a refined muscle car, it was brute force on 4 wheels. The Hemi Super Bee didn't care about comfort or handling. It cared about making noise, lighting up the rear tires, and leaving chaos in its wake. Number 4, 1969, AMC AMX 390. American Motors Corporation wasn't usually the brand people thought of when it came to wild muscle cars, but in 1969, AMC shocked everyone with the AMX 390. This two-seater muscle machine wasn't just different, it was chaotic in the best way possible. While other muscle cars were big, heavy, and brash, the AMX was compact, lightweight, and fitted with a massive heart. Under the hood sat a 390 cubic inch V8, producing 325 horsepower, which may not sound like chaos compared to Mopar Hemis or Chevy big blocks, but when paired with the AMX's smaller size, it turned the car into a rocket. The short wheelbase made it quick and agile, but it also made the AMX notoriously twitchy at high speeds. It was a car that begged to be pushed hard, but punished drivers who didn't respect its limits. Visually, the AMX stood out too. With its bold styling, aggressive stance, and eye-catching paint options, it didn't look like anything else on the road. AMC even leaned into its chaotic spirit by offering wild promotions, like giving away Playboy bunnies autographs with new AMX purchases. The 1969 AMX 390 proved that chaos wasn't reserved for the Big Three. AMC built a muscle car that was just as wild, just as rebellious, and arguably even more unpredictable. Number 3. 1977 Pontiac Firebird Trans Am. By the late 70s, muscle cars were starting to fade under the weight of emissions laws and rising insurance costs. But Pontiac wasn't ready to let the chaos die, and the 1977 Firebird Trans Am proved it. With its screaming chicken hood decal, T-tops, and a front end that looked like it wanted to pick a fight, this car became an icon of rebellion and a Hollywood superstar, thanks to Smokey and the Bandit. Under the hood, the Trans Am offered the 6.6-liter V8, delivering up to 200 horsepower in an era where most cars were struggling to crack triple digits. That might sound tame compared to earlier monsters, but the attitude, sound, and sheer presence of the Trans Am made up for it. Drop the hammer, and the deep growl from the exhaust was enough to turn heads for blocks. What really made this car chaotic wasn't just performance, it was culture. The Trans Am symbolized defiance in an era trying to tame muscle cars. It was flashy, loud, and unapologetically over the top, keeping the spirit of chaos alive when everyone else was dialing it back. The 1977 Trans Am wasn't just a car, it was a movement, a symbol of muscle car madness refusing to go quietly. Number 2, 1969 Chevrolet Copo Camaro ZL1. If there's one car that perfectly defined the phrase "built for chaos," it's the 1969 Chevrolet Copo Camaro ZL1. Born out of Chevrolet's secret central office production order, Copo program, this Camaro was never meant for the average driver. It was designed to dominate drag strips. At the heart of the ZL1 was a 427 cubic inch aluminum big block V8, an engine originally developed for Can-Am racing. It was rated at 430 horsepower, but real output was closer to 500, making it one of the most powerful engines ever stuffed into a production Camaro. And because it was aluminum, it kept the car surprisingly lightweight for all that muscle under the hood. The result? Absolute chaos. The ZL1 was brutally fast, but notoriously difficult to tame. With minimal creature comforts and a price tag nearly double that of a regular Camaro, it was a wild, uncompromising machine that few could afford, and fewer could handle. Only 69 were ever built, making it not just one of the rarest Camaros, but one of the most legendary. The Copo ZL1 wasn't about practicality, style, or even mass production. It was about unleashing unfiltered power, the kind of chaos that defined the muscle car era. Number 1, 1969 Dodge Charger RT 426 HEMI. If one car deserves the crown for being built for pure chaos, it's the 1969 Dodge Charger RT 426 HEMI. This wasn't just a muscle car, it was a cultural icon, a rolling thunderstorm of noise, power, and presence. From the moment it appeared on the streets, the Charger RT demanded respect, and when optioned with the 426 HEMI, it became an untamed beast that terrified rivals and thrilled fans. The Hemi engine, conservatively rated at 425 horsepower, was a legend in its own right. Drop the hammer, and the Charger launched forward with tire-shredding force, its deep exhaust note echoing like an earthquake. With its long, aggressive body lines, hidden headlights, and menacing stance, the Charger RT didn't just look chaotic, it was chaos on wheels. What cemented its place in history was its dual identity. On one hand, it was a race-ready muscle car that could dominate drag strips. On the other, it became a pop culture hero, forever immortalized in movies and TV shows like Bullitt and the Dukes of Hazzard. No other car combined raw performance, jaw-dropping looks, and cultural impact so explosively. The 1969 Dodge Charger RT-HEMI wasn't just built for speed. It was built for pure, unfiltered chaos. From the wild aero experiments of Dodge and Ford to the raw, tire-melting Hemis and big block monsters of GM and beyond, these 17 muscle cars weren't designed to be polite. They were designed to stir chaos. They broke rules, scared insurers, and thrilled drivers who dared to tame them. Some were drag strip terrors, others were cultural icons, but all of them shared one thing in common. They pushed the limits of what a car could be.